When all the sacrifice seems invisible, the journey of a father who never gave up. I'll never forget the feeling of emptiness I felt that day. I stood outside the auditorium, trying to understand how my own daughter could prevent me from attending her graduation, as if all the effort I'd made for her had been invisible. My heart was racing, my throat was dry, and a mixture of anger and sadness crushed me inside. I looked at the people entering, all smiling, and felt that my presence there was unwelcome, that my daughter was choosing another life, another father, even knowing all the sacrifices I'd made to give her a future. Despair took over, and for a few seconds I thought I wouldn't be able to breathe properly. Each step I took on that sidewalk felt heavier than the last, and reality hit me brutally. Everything I'd done for years, every sleepless night, every vacation I'd given up, every penny I'd saved, seemed to mean nothing to her in that moment. That's when I realized how profound the rejection was. And I, who had always been the fulcrum in her life, the one who carried responsibilities, the one who ensured she had a home, food, and opportunities, was being ignored. The pain took on a physical form, a pressure in my chest that left me trembling, and I sat on a bench in the nearby square, trying to gather my thoughts. That's when I began to think about everything I'd experienced. The sleepless nights with fever, the late bills I'd paid so as not to leave her with. Nothing, the job I'd taken for stability rather than pleasure, the silent struggle of being a father without help. And even in the face of all this, my love wasn't enough to stop her from choosing Gustavo, who showed up with new clothes, expensive gifts, and a life of luxury I could never offer. Anger mixed with fear. Fear of being forgotten, of being replaced in the heart of the one I loved most. It was at that moment, sitting there, that I realized I could no longer react solely to the impulse of grief. The tears began to fall, and I finally spoke to myself for the first time that day. I needed clarity. I needed to understand how to move forward without losing myself. That's when I introduced myself, raw and truthful. My name is Eduardo, I'm 42 years old, and I've dedicated my entire life to raising my daughter alone after Carla cheated on me. Acknowledging this gave me strength. I'd never said it out loud, but I needed to hear it from myself, to admit that all the effort I'd put in was real, that it wasn't weakness to feel the pain of rejection, and that it was human to be afraid of losing my own daughter. It was strange, but hearing my own inner voice say this brought a sense of stability amidst the emotional chaos. Clarity didn't erase the pain, but it brought focus. I began to realize that my priority needed to be myself and my self-respect, that I couldn't give up the college fund I'd saved for years as an act of sacrifice, even though I was tempted to give in just to seek approval or affection. It was a painful but necessary decision. I felt anger and sadness, but also a spark of hope. The hope that even with rejection, there was still room to rebuild my life and maintain my dignity. I knew the journey wouldn't be easy, that the pain would stay with me for months, maybe years, but I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, control over my own life, even amid my daughter's rejection. And it was there, sitting on that bench, crying and breathing slowly, that I realized that day would mark a turning point. I could allow the pain to crush me, or I could use it as strength to rebuild. I felt every raw emotion, every bit of despair and anger, but I also began to see resilience. For the first time, I understood that being a father isn't just about pleasing or being accepted. It also means setting boundaries, even when it hurts. It was painful to accept that my daughter might not value me, but I felt I was taking the first step toward protecting myself, preserving my dignity, and eventually rebuilding my relationship with her in a healthier, more balanced way. In the days that followed, the feeling of rejection continued to haunt me, but I began to realize that I needed to transform this pain into something that would strengthen me. I would wake up with a heavy heart, remembering Sophia and the graduation I couldn't attend. But at the same time, I began to pay attention to myself, I began to notice my own achievements that had been overshadowed by the effort dedicated to my daughter, my work, the years of saving every penny to ensure her education and future, the ability to stand firm even in the face of betrayal and abandonment. All of this began to reveal itself as proof of strength I had never appreciated. For the first time, I felt I could look at myself with pride, even if Sophia didn't recognize it. Despair gave way to a kind of harsh clarity, which showed me that I didn't need my daughter's validation to be valuable. That my story was real, my struggle was real, and I deserved to exist without guilt, without shame, without giving up what I had built. It was also during this period that I began to understand the importance of setting clear boundaries. I spent years believing that love meant giving up everything, always putting myself second, accepting everything my daughter offered without question. But experience taught me that love also involves self-respect. Deciding not to hand over my college fund, even though I felt the weight of a broken heart, was an act of self-love. I knew it might hurt her, that she might hate me in that moment, but I also knew that giving in would mean losing a part of myself, and this time I wasn't willing. I learned that true love isn't measured by sacrifices that destroy us, but by choices that preserve our integrity. This realization brought a mixture of relief and pain. Relief in finally acting consciously, and pain in realizing that love and sacrifice aren't always reciprocated the way we expect. As I reflected, I began to connect with friends and people I'd long ago neglected. The isolation I experienced during the years of exclusive dedication to my daughter made me realize how I'd neglected my own social life, my interests, my moments of pleasure. Reclaiming these spaces was difficult, almost embarrassing at first, but it helped me rebuild my self-esteem. I laughed again, felt the urge to leave the house, to live, to rediscover myself. And the more I reconnected with myself, the more I understood that my pain didn't have to define my entire existence. I could be a father and, at the same time, a man, an individual, a person with my own desires and plans. This reconstruction didn't erase the rejection I'd suffered, but it gave meaning to the life I could still live. The balance was unstable, but it was emerging. At the same time, I began writing about my feelings. I dug out old notebooks and began to record everything I was feeling, from the purest rage to the vulnerability I'd never allowed myself to show. Writing helped me organize my mind, give voice to emotions that seemed to suffocate my body. Each sentence was an act of release. Each written word lessened the pressure inside my chest. Writing didn't make me forget Sophia or the pain of rejection, but it allowed me to realize that I could be whole even when hurt. This habit became therapeutic, almost like a mirror to my soul, where I could see all the layers of myself. The devoted father, the hurt man, the human being who still had the strength to start over. It was at that moment that I felt the weight of overcoming begin to lift, small but real. And finally, something inside me began to shift, a sense of hope mixed with clarity about my own limits. I realized that life isn't about Sophia's or anyone else's approval. My love for her didn't need to be conditioned on submission or acceptance of her every decision. I could love without destroying myself, without giving up who I am, and this gave me unexpected strength. For the first time, I felt I could handle pain without being crushed by it. I didn't know exactly what the future would hold, if Sophia would ever understand what I did for her, or if we would ever be close again. But the feeling of control over my own life brought peace. For the first time in a long time, I felt that despite everything, I could still rebuild my world, rebuild my daily life, and live with dignity, even while bearing the scars of rejection. As the days passed, I began to notice small but significant changes in myself. Each decision I made to protect myself emotionally brought unexpected relief. I no longer had to blame myself for feeling angry, sad, or afraid. Sophia's rejection had been brutal, but it also showed me that I needed to invest in myself, rediscover my own life and interests. I began dedicating more time to activities I'd previously neglected. Walks, books I hadn't read in years, small projects that had always been put on the back burner. Each act of self-care was a way of reconnecting with the strength that existed within me, and this awareness gave me a sense of freedom I'd never experienced. For the first time, I felt I could be a father without giving up my individuality. I began to realize that my feelings weren't just pain or anger, but also resilience. Resilience to accept that, despite my daughter's rejection, I could still exist with dignity and purpose. It was a slow process. Because each reminder of sacrifice seemed to poke at the wound, each thought of the missed graduation made my chest tighten again. But gradually, I realized that I didn't need to let myself be paralyzed by these feelings. I could feel them, understand them, and still act toward my own life. I learned that strength isn't the absence of pain, but the ability to continue even with it. This realization became a kind of emotional fuel, allowing me to transform each tear into a learning experience and each frustration into an opportunity for growth. Gradually, I began to reevaluate my relationship with Sophia. I understood that although she had hurt me deeply, she was still my daughter, and I could choose how to handle it. I decided my approach wouldn't be one of punishment or resentment, but of clear boundaries and love that respected both me and her. I could love without being humiliated or diminished, and this was a crucial lesson. Understanding that my role as a father doesn't require constant submission or approval gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in a long time. This clarity allowed me to observe the situation with a more balanced perspective, seeing reality without being overwhelmed by pain or the desire to fix everything immediately. It was also during this period that I began to realize the true impact of my efforts over the years. Every sacrifice, every penny saved, every sleepless night caring for Sophia, none of it had been in vain, even if she didn't recognize it at the time. I could honor my dedication by upholding my principles and protecting what I'd built. The decision not to hand over the university fund wasn't about revenge. It was about preserving everything I'd built and the dignity I'd regained. This realization gave me unexpected strength, as if I'd finally closed an emotional cycle that had been holding me back. The pain remained, but now it was accompanied by clarity, purpose, and determination. And it was at that point that I realized that overcoming pain doesn't mean erasing the pain, but learning to live with it in a healthy way. I could feel anger, sadness, and disappointment without being destroyed by them. I began to understand that my love for Sophia didn't need to be conditioned on her acceptance or approval, and that my life shouldn't be defined by the rejection I'd suffered. Feeling this freedom was transformative. The feeling of being able to exist with dignity, even while carrying emotional wounds, brought hope. For the first time in a long time, I felt I could rebuild my world, resume dreams and projects that had been put on hold, and above all, continue being a father without losing my own identity and strength. Over time, I realized I needed to transform my learning into concrete actions. It wasn't enough to simply feel inner strength. I needed to take action. I began to reorganize my routine, prioritizing activities that strengthened me emotionally and physically. I resumed exercising, paying attention to my diet, and allowing myself moments of leisure that I had long neglected. Every small gesture was a reminder that I had a right to my own happiness, even as a father. I understood that in order to continue being present in a healthy way, it was essential that I take care of myself. By doing so, I realized that my pain didn't diminish, but the way I dealt with it transformed. It was no longer a paralyzing weight, but a tool that reminded me of who I am and what I've built throughout my life. Furthermore, I began to reconnect with bonds that had been weakened by years of exclusive dedication to Sophia. Old friends, co-workers, and family members I had neglected began to find space in my life again. This connection brought lightness, support, and new perspectives. I realized I didn't have to face the pain alone. There were people who cared and could help me see the situation from a different perspective. Talking about my feelings, listening to others' experiences, and sharing my own. Pain was liberating. Each conversation reminded me that despite the rejection I suffered, I could still build relationships based on respect, support, and reciprocity, something that, for years, had been limited to my role as a father. At the same time, I began to reflect on my expectations for Sophia. I understood that although it was painful, she had the right to make her own choices, even if those choices deeply hurt me. This didn't mean I was giving up on her or on being a father. It just meant I needed to separate my desires from what she truly chose. This acceptance was a huge step in my overcoming because it allowed me to reduce constant frustration and focus on what I could control: my actions, my decisions, and my well-being. I learned that emotional maturity also involves recognizing limits, accepting imperfections, and dealing with the consequences of other people's choices without losing one's own integrity. With these reflections, I began to see the college fund not just as money saved, but as a symbol of my effort, my dedication, and my ability to plan and protect the future. Maintaining this fund became an act of preservation and self-love. I understood that giving in to Sophia's emotional pressure would be a betrayal of my own history and all the work I had done over the years. This awareness brought a sense of personal justice. I didn't need her immediate approval to validate my life or my choices. Realizing this, I felt a growing strength, a security I hadn't felt in a long time, and this was consolidated with each decision I made for my emotional and financial well-being. And for the first time, I felt a kind of peace mixed with clarity. I still felt the pain of rejection, the lack of her presence, and the anger at the scorn. But I was no longer held hostage by these feelings. I could feel them, acknowledge them, and at the same time continue living, making conscious decisions, and preserving my dignity. The experience taught me that overcoming pain isn't about forgetting or erasing pain, but living with it in a way that doesn't paralyze us. I felt that, even in the face of rejection, I could rebuild my life, rediscover purpose, create new memories, and even, who knows, rebuild my relationship with Sophia in a healthier way in the future. The feeling of control over my own life brought hope and a new sense of strength I hadn't felt in a long time. Over time, I realized that the greatest lesson lay not only in the pain of rejection, but in the ability to pick myself up and value myself. I could feel sadness and still make firm decisions. Every act of self-care, every boundary I set with Sophia became proof that I could still exist with dignity and strength, even when rejected by my own daughter. I began to realize that my life didn't need to be defined by her love or approval. I could be a father and, at the same time, a man, an individual, a complete human being. This realization brought an unexpected sense of freedom, a feeling that despite the emotional scars, I still had control over my life and my choices. Little by little, I began to engage more in personal and professional projects that had been put on hold. I resumed hobbies, invested in courses I'd always wanted to take, and organized my time so I could grow and learn without guilt. Each small achievement became emotional fuel, strengthening my self-esteem and demonstrating that I was capable of creating a meaningful life, even without relying on Sophia's validation. The pain was still present, but it was no longer paralyzing. It became part of my story, a reminder that I survived extremely difficult times and could still transform my experiences into growth. At times, I still felt a pang of sadness thinking about the distance between Sophia and me, but I learned not to let it define my happiness. I understood that being a father doesn't mean giving up on yourself, and that love can exist without submission or self-annihilation. This emotional maturity gave me clarity about how to act in the future. I could love my daughter without sacrificing my dignity, without giving in to unfair pressure, and still maintain a respectful relationship if she was willing. This awareness gave me the strength to deal with conflicting feelings in a balanced way, something that years ago would have seemed impossible. Today, I can look back and recognize how much I've grown. The day I was prevented from attending Sophia's graduation marked the beginning of a profound transformation. The rejection that seemed overwhelming became an opportunity for self-discovery, emotional reconstruction, and learning about boundaries and self-love. I still deal with the pain. I still miss her presence. But I've learned not to depend on that approval to exist. I've managed to regain my self-esteem, my dignity, and my ability to love without destroying myself. This balance, achieved little by little, is what keeps me strong and allows me to look to the future with hope and clarity. In the end, I realized that overcoming grief isn't a final state, but an ongoing process. I still feel my daughter's absence and rejection, but I learned that I can fully exist, build my own happiness, and maintain my integrity, regardless of her choices. The pain didn't disappear, but it stopped being a crushing weight. It became a reminder that I survived, that I can still grow, rebuild myself, and live with dignity. I learned that a father's love isn't about giving up on oneself, and that setting limits doesn't diminish affection. On the contrary, it strengthens it. Today, despite the wounds, I can breathe, move forward, and believe that even in the face of rejection and pain, it's possible to rise again and find the strength to carry on.